Hey guys, it's Kerry, my review for my most anticipated film of the entire year, Mary Poppins Returns. And what Mary Poppins Returns is essentially about is we center on Jane and Michael, but 30 years later, they have both very much settled down. Michael has sadly lost his wife, and he's going through a very difficult time in his life. He is facing foreclosure on his house and things like that, and, his kids have basically looked after themselves because he's just been going through a lot of stress, and in comes Mary Poppins, hoping to turn things around for the family, but also try to get Jane and Michael, especially Michael, back on the right path while everyone else tries to save their home, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Mary Poppins Returns, I think it's safe to say that I was pretty hyped for this film. Mary Poppins is one of my favorite family films of all time. I grew up with it pretty much religiously as a kid. It's one of the essential films, and, any film following up to something that is that masterfully crafted and that is that iconic, it's obviously no easy feat. It obviously is going to be a tall task. However, I was really excited because it's a sequel. It's not a remake, and that was definitely a reason to be excited, but also thinking the possibilities of what they could really do. I was really hoping this could be something great, and I am so happy to say that this film did not let me down at all. While it's not as good as the first film, which, I don't think any film is ever going to top what that first film did, this still is a fantastic sequel that perfectly honors the original, but is able to do enough, I think, to separate it on its own. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And I'll just say right now, every single actor in this movie is at the top of their game. Every actor is clearly having the time of their life, and I really don't think anyone was half-assing it here. I really do think everyone was just killing it in their roles, and I really love what everyone brought to the table, especially when it comes to Emily Blunt, who obviously had pretty big shoes to fill. Julie Andrews as Mary Poppins is iconic. When we think of Mary Poppins, that's immediately what we harken back to. That's the portrayal that we see. And look, is this on the level of Julie Andrews? No, but Blunt does enough, I think, to make this character her own. She's a little bit more stern. She's a little bit more, she's a little less nurturing than she was in the first one, but she still does embody that warmth and just that presence that Mary Poppins does bring. Blunt very much does have it down. She completely transforms into this role. From the second that she arrived, pretty much, I thought she did an incredible job. There are moments in this movie, honestly, where it felt like nothing had changed. It felt like Blunt was channeling her inner Andrews. However, it wasn't like she was necessarily trying, it didn't feel like she was trying to copy her. It didn't feel like she was trying to imitate her. She very much did her own thing. I'm just saying there were points in the movie where it did very much feel that way, and I think Blunt overall did a phenomenal job here. She gave truly one of the best performances I've seen all year. She continues to show why she's one of the best in the business working today, and I was just completely moved by her in this film. I think she completely killed it here, and I really hope she gets nominated for this film because it's definitely very deserving. And like I said, she definitely had a very big role here, and it definitely was not an easy task, but she really rose to the occasion more than I ever could have imagined, and I loved what she did here. But someone else who is not getting enough credit, I think, is Lin-Manuel Miranda, who I was very excited to see in this movie because this is really his first big, movie role, and thank God for that because he kills it as Jack. What I love about the character of Jack right off the bat is that he's not Bert. He's not trying to be Bert. Yes, he is filling the role of Bert, but Jack is a very different type of character. He's still a lot of fun, but he has a more steady job, and there's a little bit more that he's going through, and he has a bit more of a backstory to him, and I think Miranda overall, he's just so talented in this role. Him and Emily Blunt have such great chemistry, but on his own, he also is fantastic. There's so much he does in this film, between, his acting, which, like I said, is great, but also the singing and dancing. There's one sequence especially where he does this incredible rap, and a lot of people have talked about it, but it is never overbearing. It fits right in, and what he's able to do there it's just incredible. I don't know how he was able to pull it off the way he did. I think he was absolutely phenomenal in this film, and I loved what he did. Again, he's not someone that, if you're not as much into theater like I am, he's not a household name yet. I think after this film, though, he's very much going to get there, and I really do want to see him do more live-action musicals, because I think this is very much in his wheelhouse. I think this is definitely what he should be doing moving forward, and I think he was just perfectly casted here. And then everyone else also does a fantastic job. Ben Whishaw, let me just say, is phenomenal in this film. I loved what he did as Michael Banks. I'll just say right now, Michael Banks is not Mr. Banks. There's a lot more pressure that is mounted on him. There's a lot more tragedy that he's dealing with, and Whishaw just gives a very emotional performance here. You can tell the stress that he's under, but you can also see how this is how this has really affected him. He's someone who seems to have stripped any sense of fun or any sense of imagination away. He's not into it anymore, and he kind of wants to move past it. He feels like those days are long behind him, and he just gives a really great performance here. You really care about him in this film, and I think Whishaw, between this and Paddington, he's really starting to show how he's one of the best younger actors out there. I love what he did here. Emily Mortimer is also a very good Jane. I really liked her role in this film. All these smaller roles as well, like, say, Colin Firth or Julie Walters, they all do a very good job. But I really want to zero in on all three of the kids here. Pixie Davies, Nathanael, Saleh, and Joel Dawson, all three of them are really great. I thought all three of these kid actors were very good. They're different from Jane and Michael, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but they all did a very good job. I think they all have bright futures ahead of them. Pixie Davies has already done stuff. She was on Humans, actually, and things like that, but I think everyone really just did an incredible job in this film. Even smaller roles, like, say, David Warner as Admiral Boom, everyone really gave their all in this movie. I never felt like anyone was half-assing it, and I was just very impressed with the cast here. But now I really want to get to the directing and the writing, because obviously the directing here by Rob Marshall, he's obviously not Walt Disney, and obviously he's not Robert Stevenson either, so it's definitely, again, similar to Emily Blunt. It's a reasonably tall task, and you can tell why there'd be a lot of pressure there, but considering that Marshall is no stranger to musicals, I think that really helped elevate this film. I mean, his directing here is really great. He does enough, I think, to retain that sense of fun and that sense of innocence that Mary Poppins has. He definitely does retain that, but he also adds a bit more realism to it this time around. The film feels a little bit darker than the first one, and that's a good thing. Like, it feels like it has a little bit more weight to it, and I think that's something that Marshall really did a good job with here. He was able to do enough where it feels like the Mary Poppins we know, but also kind of add his own little spin on it, and I thought his directing overall was very good here. I wouldn't say it's, like, amazing or anything, because, and then the writing in this film as well, I was also very impressed with, because right off the bat, I mean, people are obviously going to be worried going into this film, and that is definitely understandable considering, how beloved the first one really is, and when you're trying to follow it up, obviously, the biggest concern is it going to live up to the original? And I'll say right now, the best thing this film does, besides the fact that it has a very talented and perfectly casted bunch of actors, is that it doesn't try to be a rehash of the first movie. This is very much its own thing, and that's something that I really loved about it. Right off the bat, for example, Michael Banks is not Mr. Banks. This is not someone who is very cold and doesn't seem, and kind of disheartening, and seems to be a bit neglecting to his children. That's not who he is. He really does appreciate his children, and they do have a really good bond, but he is going through a very significant loss. He's lost his wife, and that's very much had an impact on him, and again, they did a good job with not making him like Mr. Banks. There are times where he might yell or have an outburst, but he's not Mr. Banks, and I really did love that a lot here. And same with the children. One of the best things I think this movie did is what they decided to do with the children. While Jane and Michael were your typical, like, mischievous children who always found themselves near trouble and seemed to immediately were on board with, like, the magic that Mary Poppins brings, these kids are not so keen to it at first. In fact, they aren't as on board with her magic. It takes her actually a while to convince them, and this was a really cool idea. The children very much depend on each other, and because of the fact that Michael has very much been dealing with what he has, the kids kind of take care of him at points. And I thought that was a really cool idea, that these kids were a lot more well-behaved, but also they showed a much more bigger sense of maturity that we didn't see in Jane and Michael. And it really did work here. I mean, sure, they do have moments where they get to be kids, but like I said, they've had to do a lot of growing up because of what's happened to them, and I think that was a really good idea because it helps differentiate from the Jane and Michael that we know, which, you know, those Jane and Michael, they're still very prominent in this film, but the film is not, you know, the children, I'm saying, they're not Jane and Michael. They are very much their own characters, and I think they did a very good job with that. And same goes for the Jack character in this film. He is not Bert, like I said. However, he was Bert's apprentice, so he does have a history there, but he has a much different sort of story he's dealing with here. You know, he isn't interested in Mary Poppins in a loving manner like Bert was. Obviously, Bert tried to flirt with Mary Poppins a lot in the first film, but Jack is much more interested in Jane, actually, and their little romance that they formed throughout the film, I can understand some people thought was underutilized, but I actually really liked it. I thought it was something really different and sweet, and these two actually do have a history together that I really did love seeing, and I think they did a very good job with that overall. Again, it was something that I wasn't necessarily expecting and that I didn't necessarily want, but I think it actually was very well handled, and it took this character in a completely different direction than I was expecting, and I really love that overall. However, I will say, if you are a fan of the first Mary Poppins, which chances are, if you see this film, you're probably as big as a fan as I am, or at least you enjoy the film, there definitely are a lot of winks and nods to the original. However, they don't overcrowd the film. Like, you may briefly, like, for example, when Mary Poppins arrives, you do hear a little bit of Spoonful of Sugar. But again, the film is not trying to copy off of what the first one did. It's honoring it. It's showing that, okay, that happened, but now let's move on to something else. And I wish more sequels would try to do that. And sure, there are some things that are definitely similar about this film. Like, sure, Mary Poppins arrives, she has a number with the children, they do go into, like, a, you know, an animated world, there is, like, a, you know, instead of a chimney sweep number, there is a lamplighter number, and sure, that is similar, but and the film does sometimes hit similar beats, but I would honestly compare it to, like, The Force Awakens, where they try to do something, you know, they do things that worked in the first one, but they add a new little spin on it, and I think this film actually did that quite well, and I was very impressed by that overall. Also, the central narrative itself has a lot more weight to it, like I said. I mean, not only are these kids dealing with a lot of grief, but they also have this fear of their house being foreclosed. So the kids in general, you know, the adventures they go on Mary Poppins, it's not just like fun little frivolous adventures. Like, that's not what it is. It's, you know, in the first film, sure, it was like that, but here there actually is a greater purpose to what they're doing. Basically, every single action they take in this film is trying to save their home. And again, I really liked the way that was done here. There's also this fantastic sequence with the kids involving the 2D animated part of the film, and it was something completely different than what I was expecting. You know, in the first one, they focused very much on Mary Poppins and Bert. This one is much more focused on the kids, and what they do with it, at first, it took me a bit off guard. Like, I was like, all right, I don't really know where you're going with this, but the way it wrapped up was fantastic. It really went with what the kids were going through, and it was a really cool idea that I actually really loved. It was a really interesting way for them to deal with it, and again, it just shows how much weightier this story really is, and I think they've handled that very well here. That does lead me to one of my complaints with this film, and that was the banker side of the story. Fidelity Fiduciary Bank actually plays a much larger role in this film, which is interesting considering that Michael is not an employee there, but they do have them in this film, and they are a lot more cartoony here. They are a lot more over the top, especially when it comes to Colin Firth. He's the definition of a mustache twirling type villain, and I just wasn't really the biggest fan of it. I didn't think it made a lot of sense. Like, okay, I understand that, like, he wants the Banks' shares, but he acted like this was something that he's wanted all his life. Like, all his life, he's had some sort of, like, he's had some sort of ill will towards the Banks, and he's wanted to see them fail, and we just don't really understand why. We don't really know what fuels his sort of desire for this, and it just didn't really work for me as much. Again, there's a lot in this film I do really love, but that is where the film does fall a little bit short. Firth still does a very good job in the role, but I just thought as a villain, he was pretty weak here. But again, I don't want to take away from this writing because it really is fantastic. There's a lot of stuff to really love here, and I think definitely they did a very good job with honoring the first one, but like I said, also doing enough to make this one stand out. The cinematography here, let me just say, is some of the best of the entire year. It's very colorful. It's very aesthetically pleasing. There's a lot of amazing sequences here. Mary Poppins' intro in this film, like how she is introduced, is one of the most epic things I've seen all year. I love the way it was done, and even that is a little bit different with how she's introduced, and I thought that was really cool overall. There's a lot of really great sequences here, but yes, the 2D animated sequence definitely does stick out, especially since that is such a rarity, you know, with films today, and the fact that they were able to do that, I was just so overcome with so much happiness and so much joy that they were able to accomplish this as well as they did. And the way they do it here, it's something completely different than the first one. This one almost looks like it is a painting. Like the first one, sure, they were inside of a painting, but this one, it's something a little bit different, and I truly don't know how they pulled it off as well as they did, but I was so impressed by it. I loved everything about that sequence, and it really was incredible there. I love the way that whole thing was done. As far as the rest of cinematography, it all looks really great. Like I said, it's a very colorful film. There are some really great sequences that I really don't want to spoil for you guys, but it is fantastic cinematography, and I loved what they did here. The score in this film, a lot of people are going to talk about it because obviously the first film has some of the greatest songs in any Disney film. So asking any film to follow that up, sure, it's going to put a bit of a disadvantage. And are these songs going to be iconic and stand the test of time that the first one did? Maybe not, but I certainly hope they do, because to me at least, these songs, some of them are actually on the level of the first one. 3 in particular that I genuinely do think are fantastic. Most of these songs, in fact, are fantastic, and I really loved all of them. I love right off the bat that they didn't try to reuse any of the songs from the first one. A lot of musical sequels, they tend to fall into that trap of trying to redo what the first one did, and this film is not, it's not interested in doing that. It's giving you a bunch of new songs, and I think all of them are very memorable, and I really did enjoy most of them. There's really only one that I wasn't a fan of, but most of the songs here, I mean, Triple O Light, fantastic. Can you imagine that? You know, you've heard those two probably throughout the marketing, and they definitely do deserve all the praise they've gotten, but also some of the smaller numbers, like this one number that Ben Whishaw has early in the film, which it's just a very tender, very saddening number, but he really does a great job. Or Underneath the Lovely London Sky, which opens up the film, is really great here. Or the finale of this film is incredible. I don't want to say much more about it, but it's incredible, and it honestly does, I think, rival Let's Go Fly a Kite at points. I mean, there are some songs here that are just really going to stick with you. The song they use in the 2D animated sequence is phenomenal. A lot of great songs going on here. Like I said, though, there was one song I wasn't as big as a fan of, and that was Meryl Streep's. Now, I understand that they want her in the film, and she definitely does have a purpose here. It's not like she doesn't have a purpose in this film, because there's definitely a very clear reason for her to be here, but her musical number was the only time when it felt like the film kind of screeched to a halt. It felt like it kind of stopped, and I don't think we needed this song to be here. It just felt a little bit overlong. I didn't really know what the point of this whole musical number was. It felt like something that they really just did because Meryl Streep was there and they wanted to give her a song, and it is admittedly entertaining, and again, maybe I'll enjoy it on a rewatch, but right now, I just don't really understand the significance of it in the film. But really, other than that, all these songs are great, and this musical score alone is so great here. I loved the score in this film that Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman did. It's such a memorable score. Anytime it plays, I mean, it's something that you're not going to be able to stop humming, and I loved everything about the musical score in this film. There are some really great key moments that it plays, and I loved it a lot. And then the editing. The film is basically just about as long as the first one, and similar to the first one, I never really felt the length here. There really wasn't a point when it dragged me. Even that Meryl Streep song, which, like I said, I thought was a little bit tacked on, it still really didn't drag for me. I was into this film pretty much the whole time. I thought it was very entertaining. It was very emotional. It basically did everything that I wanted it to do. Overall, Mary Poppins Returns delivered in pretty much every aspect. It brought a new story that was a little bit richer, a little bit more emotional. It definitely does, it is dependent on you watching the first one, but again, it's a sequel. I mean, it does what it should do. It builds on themes from the first one, and also is able to channel in some new ideas that I really enjoyed. The characters here are not like the characters in the first one. Emily Blunt alone is phenomenal. She better get Oscar acclaim. Same with Lin-Manuel Miranda, although I do think he is going to be very much snubbed. The musical numbers here are just as catchy and fun. They're very memorable. There are some fantastic sequences that I think everyone is really going to eat up here. If you adored the first Mary Poppins, I think this film is going to be right up your alley. It's going to give you exactly what you want here. Also, let me just say, a really thrilling climax as well. I mean, the way they end this off is not what I was expecting, and again, that's something else that I really did enjoy. Also, some really nice cameos in there. Some I think they're really going to tug at your heartstrings, although I do wish they wouldn't have revealed one in the trailer, because I think it would have been a little bit more impactful if they didn't. But overall, this film did pretty much everything that I hoped it would. Besides those two flaws I have with it, this is basically everything that I could have wanted in a sequel. It's a film that I think we really do kind of need right now. We don't see family films like this anymore, and it really is a shame, because I think this film shows that, you know, there are smart content for families out there, but nowadays it's bogged down by all the dumb stuff that Sony does and just a lot of the really stupid animated films we get. This one really does stick out. This one reminds us of a time when those films had just as much craft and just as much heart put into it, and it had just as much effort put into it as well, which we just don't see anymore. And I'm really hoping that this film is able to usher in that era for Disney and make them realize that we do need more films like this. We need more films that have more elegance and have that sense of intelligence that I think is really important for families. I think it definitely is coming out at the right time for sure. It's the film that we need right now, and I think it is very much going to, if you are a fan of Mary Poppins, I think this is very much going to give you what you want for the most part. It certainly pleased me, and I am absolutely going to give Mary Poppins Returns overall an A. Ugh, I am so happy that this film turned out as good as it did. I was a little bit worried, honestly, before this film came out, because it was so highly anticipated and my expectations were pretty astronomical, so it really could have let me down, but I am so happy that it basically hit all the right notes for me. But if you have seen Mary Poppins Returns, let me know what you thought of it. Please see this film as soon as you can. I really do think it's deserving of all of your time for sure. I'm definitely going to be seeing this like 2 or 3 more times before I make my best list, because it's definitely going to be on there for sure. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.
To cook without a recipe, can you imagine that? And heaven knows what lives within that pot. Some pirates follow treasure maps and wear a silly hat. They search the world for buried gold. They won't grow up and don't grow